The latest revelations about Jimmy Savile's abuse have emerged as a result of a joint investigation by this programme and our colleagues on Panorama. It uncovered some startling new evidence about the trust that the government put in Savile in the 1980s, effectively asking him to run Broadmoor, the high-security psychiatric hospital. This comes as the BBC and the Department of Health each prepare to publish their own inquiries into abuse by Jimmy Savile, and as research by the NSPCC reveals at least 500 allegations against him, in one case involving a child of just 2 years old. Shelley Joffrey reports.
Every Monday morning, Broadmoor's alarm echoes around the Royal County of Berkshire. It's a sign that Broadmoor is no ordinary hospital. Walls and fences surround this Victorian institution. It's a hospital that looks like a prison. A hospital the Yorkshire Ripper calls home. A hospital where for a short period in the late 1980s, a man now described as one of Britain's most prolific sex offenders was calling the shots.
So there's many people say, how come a showbiz punter is doing a job like this at the world's #1 mental hospital? And what they don't know is that I've been here 20 years already in an honorary capacity.
This 40 minutes documentary was recorded at the hospital by the BBC 25 years ago. It's never been shown since. To get permission to film, the BBC had to negotiate with its own star, who had, incredibly, just been given a top job at Broadmoor by the government.
If you want to win any popularity awards, you don't take the job as the boss here.
The story of how Jimmy Savile became the self-declared boss of Broadmoor is the story of how Jimmy Savile evaded justice for more than 60 years. It's a tale of blackmail, of bullying, and of boasts of powerful connections. And it starts in the swinging 60s.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome indeed to Top of the Pops, and how are you this evening? So how's about we should start off with a...
Jimmy Savile started volunteering here at Broadmoor in the late 1960s. He explained how he got involved with the hospital in a 1972 BBC documentary, The World of Jimmy Savile OBE.
Some years ago, in my copious fan mail, I got a notice telling me that I was an honorary member of Nutters Incorporated. Now, Nutters Incorporated is now non-existent, but it was a club then, run by some other patients at the world-famous Broadmoor Hospital.
But we've discovered that he was invited by the late Lady Monckton of Brenchley, chair of the hospital charity National League of Friends, to bring some cheer to the Victorian institution. His role as entertainments officer was rubber-stamped by the then Labour Health Secretary Barbara Castle. Jimmy Savile was given a set of gold-plated keys, a garage for his Rolls-Royce and a house on Broadmoor's grounds. Dr Pat McGrath, Broadmoor's 10th and last medical superintendent, shed some light on what the BBC star did with this extraordinary access in an interview with the BBC from 1972.
One has known him come in the middle of the night and go around with a night nurse, and if a patient is awake and disturbed, Jimmy would sit on the side of his bed and chat and so on.
We've discovered Jimmy Savile brought to Broadmoor a 14-year-old girl who took part in a BBC audition. She was a singer and guitarist. Hungry for a career in pop music, Jimmy Savile got her to play songs for patients, and after the gig, she says he indecently assaulted her at the hospital. Talking publicly for the first time, she doesn't want to be identified, and her words are spoken by an actor.
I mentioned to him how scared I was, and he reassured me by putting his arm on my shoulder and rubbing my arm, and then he gave me a cuddle, and so he was touching my breasts, and he kissed me, and he tried to put his tongue in my mouth. I didn't know if it was right, if it was wrong, if this is what they do in showbiz. I didn't know.
This programme has heard stories from former Broadmoor staff about Jimmy Savile's inappropriate behaviour. One staff member told us Savile would watch female patients stripped naked before bed. Another said he saw Jimmy Savile escort a teenage girl dressed as a carnival queen onto hospital grounds at night. Trevor Smith, a former manager at the hospital and former chairman of the Prison Officers Association, remembers seeing Jimmy Savile at a hospital charity day which attracted lots of children.
But he would not give an autograph to any young female unless you exchange that for a kiss. Now, when I say kiss, I mean, a real adult kiss. And he'd hold him by the back of the neck. Did I know he was a paedophile? Which is probably the question you're going to ask me. And the answer is yes. Now, the girl who I saw the most passionate kiss was my niece.
Did you say anything to him about it?
No, I walked off because the girls were queuing up for him, and then he would immediately say, "Oh, goodness gracious me!" all that business. Even the bosses would laugh. We all knew.
But did nobody think then to keep him away from young girls?
Well, the only people who could keep him away was the likes of the staff, the powers to be. They wouldn't keep him away because he was part of their internal power game.
Broadmoor had been notorious and controversial for decades, but by the late 1980s, the hospital had reached boiling point. Staff were seething, patients mistreated, unions at war with bosses. A damning report from the Health Advisory Service warned time was running out. To try to break the deadlock, the Department of Health set up a task force. And the person they appointed to lead it, Jimmy Savile. Staff quipped that a lunatic had taken over the asylum. I'm right outside the imposing 20-foot red brick walls of Broadmoor, and I'm off to meet two former nurses with more than 50 years' experience at the hospital. Both men still live in the shadows of Broadmoor. Hello there, Shelley. Hi. Nice to meet you.
Neville Sandyford.
Hello, Shelley. I'm Keith Palmer.
Hi, Keith.
You like to walk down the garden and see the back of Broadmoor wall?
Yeah, let's go and have a look.
Behind that wall, you'll find that staff had a feeling that they had a DJ telling them what to do.
So Savile was actually in charge of the hospital?
He was in charge, lock, stock and barrel.
The charges and doctors were dead against it, but Jimmy Savile was Jimmy Savile, and he could do anything.
Whoever gave Jimmy Savile control of Broadmoor, keys, the head of task force, free to do whatever he likes with a serious hospital, had to be a lunatic. Savile was only a celebrity. What qualification is that?
Neville, Keith, thanks very much for your time. Dr. Peter Jeffries was a regular visitor to the hospital at the time as a mental health commissioner. His role was to protect the rights of detained patients.
I thought, how on earth can Jimmy Savile sort out the serious accountability and management problems at Broadmoor? He was given carte blanche. He was allowed a free pass to go in and go out whenever he wanted. That is quite extraordinary.
Edwina Currie was the government minister in charge of Broadmoor at the time of Savile's appointment.
Our efforts to try and improve matters at Broadmoor came up against a very severe brick wall. And it was the senior civil servant in charge who thought that Savile might be able to do something about this. Bear in mind, Jimmy Savile had been in and out of Broadmoor for donkey's years. So why not ask Jimmy Savile if he could help to improve matters?
This programme has obtained confidential documents from the time that reveal just how dazzled the Department of Health was by the DJ. This is a memo for the personal attention of Mrs. Currie. It refers to Jimmy Savile as Dr. Savile and outlines 10 points he'd like to see for further action at Broadmoor. Dr. Savile is looking at dismissible offences to ease out staff. The document says that Dr. Savile is going through the hospital like a dose of salts, and that without the direct involvement of Dr. Savile, the medical department could have been the most difficult nut to crack. And here's a sign of his influence. It talks about applications for the new general manager of the hospital. And the document says, Dr. Savile will wish to press for Mr. Freeney in this position. Now, Alan Freeney was an old friend of Savile's from Leeds, with no previous experience of psychiatric care. Soon after the memo was written, Mr. Freeney was appointed. Alan Freeney didn't want to be interviewed, but told us that Jimmy Savile's influence at the hospital was minimal. He said he was first seconded to Broadmoor by his employer and then applied in an open competition for the role of general manager. One former member of staff who did question Jimmy Savile's role and behaviour at the hospital is Dr. Chandra Ghosh, who was one of the senior consultant forensic psychiatrists. We showed the documents to her.
If I'd seen it then, I would have felt very angry, because it's so anti-professional. if they're constantly referring to him as Dr. Savile, it is to give him a certain amount of kudos and an identity which obviously he doesn't deserve. So they were either doing it deliberately or they were making a fool of everybody.
Jimmy Savile had no medical qualifications. He did have an honorary doctorate given to him by Leeds University. But the confidential memos reveal something more sinister about the way Savile was allowed to operate at Broadmoor. Nurses there had voted to strike. Savile said he could stop them. The civil servant at the time offers her own view. I would say he was 100% sincere and committed in his desire to improve the management of Broadmoor and the lives of its patients. But I doubt he'll let anyone stand in his way, and he clearly doesn't mind how many people get trampled underfoot in the process. Savile claimed to have found that staff were subletting hospital accommodation. Here's Edwina Currie again.
He made it quite clear, he told me, that he would use that against the staff if they misbehaved and didn't call off the overtime ban and didn't start cooperating with us. Then he would tell the press.
That sounds like blackmail.
That sounds like blackmail to me as well.
And if it sounded like blackmail to you at the time, did you not think to say, hang on a minute, you can't run a top security psychiatric hospital like that?
I made a note of it at the time because I was so surprised. And I was very puzzled about it.
But the Conservative minister briefly in charge of Broadmoor in the late 1980s says she never had any reason to doubt Jimmy Savile's motives.
During the time that I was responsible, we did not have a single complaint. I've looked through all the paperwork that's available, not a single complaint. Had we known, we'd have stopped him. And it would have been very easy to stop him. I'd have just said to him, Jimmy, the keys.
We've learned that the police have now received at least 16 reports of abuse by Savile at Broadmoor. Dr Chandra Ghosh worked with female patients there. She thinks there's a simple reason more didn't complain when Savile was alive.
These were people that nobody believed. So if they had in fact turned around and said that he had abused them or raped them, nobody would have believed them. This was Mr Savile, Jimmy will fix it.
And the confidential documents we've seen show that even Department of Health officials raised concerns about Savile's behaviour. Before signing off, a female civil servant wrote, "You might have warned me of his penchant for kissing ladies full on the mouth." But we can reveal new serious allegations about Jimmy Savile at the hospital. A senior figure at the Patients' Council, an elected body to safeguard patients' rights, told us that he received 3 allegations of sexual abuse by Jimmy Savile in the 1990s. The former Broadmoor patient's words are spoken by an actor.
The Patients' Council received 3 letters from female patients, and they detailed serious allegations against Jimmy Savile in person. I can confirm from memory the letters appeared very genuine. They detailed serious allegations of sexual assault. 2 stated gross indecency and indecent assault, now called sexual assault. The other was more serious, basically calling him a rapist. All 3 letters made it clear that Jimmy Savile had abused 3 female patients, and probably more. The letters were so serious that we decided to send them to the Chief Executive, Mr Alan Franey. I can confirm that we received a reply stating that we were right to send them and that the letters were sent forward to the Complaints Department.
The Chief Executive from the period, Alan Franey, told us he can't recall the allegations and that the Complaints Department would have dealt with them. He says he held regular forums for staff and patients, and at no time during those meetings were issues raised about Savile with him. West London Mental Health NHS Trust, which now runs Broadmoor, says it can't comment while its joint investigation with the Department of Health is ongoing. It says any complaints involving Savile are part of that investigation. A spokesperson told us,
Broadmoor is a very different hospital with much more robust management and governance than it was at the time of Savile's involvement.
So what happened back then? Dr Peter Jeffries says politicians and civil servants fell for the glamour of celebrity.
That decision for him to lead the task force was not just a wrong decision, it was a bad decision and a dangerous decision, because it gave authority to a man who not only wasn't competent, but also was dangerous and manipulative and abusive.
We put our findings to Alan Collins, a solicitor from Slater Gordon, who represents more than 100 victims of Jimmy Savile.
I have this feeling of disbelief that someone like Savile should be allowed to have so much influence and authority at a hospital which is there to look after, treat some of the most vulnerable people in our society.
The Department of Health says the investigation is ongoing and it's essential that all the information is considered and investigations are thorough in order to learn the lessons about Jimmy Savile's activities. The West London Mental Health NHS Trust told us they wanted to express their sympathies to his victims. Later this month, they'll publish their findings.
Shelley Joffrey reporting, and you can see more on Panorama, Savile, The Power to Abuse, at 8:30 tonight on BBC One. And if you've been affected by any of the issues raised in that report, there are details of organisations which offer advice and support on the World at One website or at bbc.co.uk/actionline, all one word.